Good evening, and welcome to Conversations Around the Diocese, a program brought to you by We Are the Church. Please note that the views expressed here are solely those of the speakers and do not represent that of the Anglican Diocese of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. Our conversation this evening will be facilitated by Monique Castle, a member of the Cathedral Church of St. Diego de la Vega, Spanish Town. Now, sit back, relax, join and enjoy the conversation. Remember that together we are the church.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to another Conversations Around the Diocese. We say welcome to our viewers and our participants in our Zoom room and to our viewers who are on Facebook. We ask our viewers in the Zoom room to just bear with us as we are all on mute. Well, most of us are on mute at this time. And we will open all mics. We will allow for questions and discussion as the conversation unfolds. Let me remind you of the objectives of Conversations Around the Diocese. It is to provide a forum for people to have open discussion on pertinent issues. It is also to help people to navigate a world from a theoretic and a spiritual perspective, and also to guide people in the way to pray aright. And so our conversation this evening takes us to the topic mental health and you. So appropriate at this particular time. And so to guide our conversations, we have our conversation this evening. We have three panelists in the form of Reverend Marlon Simpson, SSP Stephanie Lindsay, and Mr. Jasford Gabriel. So I will introduce them to you. Reverend Marlon Simpson, sorry, I said Reverend Marlon Simpson. Reverend Marlon Simpson is a licensed associate clinical psychologist pursuing doctoral studies in neuropsychology. And he's currently working with the Beijing, Jamaica Embassy in China. Wow. Senior Superintendent Stephanie Lindsay has been serving for over 26 years with the Jamaica Constabulary Force. SSP Lindsay has worked extensively on the development of strategic communication on the development of strategic communication and brand support in the Jamaica Constabulary Force. And Mr. Jasford Gabriel is the immediate past president of the Jamaica Teachers Association and principal of Manchester High School. He's a member of the church and the pastors' council of the Mandeville New Testament. We say to our three panelists, welcome. We now invite Reverend Marlon Simpson to open the conversation with his contribution to mental health and you. Reverend Marlon?
Yes, ma'am.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
It's good to be on the other side of the seat.
It is a good feeling.
I know. Okay, so welcome to the conversation.
Thank you.
And let's start the talk.
All right. Thank you very much, Monique. Now, of course, mental health, mental challenges have always been an important aspect of our conversations, not only around the diocese, but around the world as well. But mental health has always seemed to take a backseat to many other social, emotional, and cognitive issues. But as we're seeing now, especially with COVID-19, there are a number of challenges that have come to the fore regarding mental health. And so almost as a paradigm shift, we're finding where more emphasis is on mental health, mental wellness, and of course, the opposite, where there's ill health and challenges related to that. Now, chief among the challenges that we have been seeing, especially in my own practice, is an increase in something we call COVID-19 anxiety syndrome, which is a real disorder. And it is something that emerged, of course, at the beginning of COVID. But even though it is a new term, it is not a new kind of illness. Whenever there in the past where there was a pandemic or an outbreak, it caused a certain amount of anxiety, it caused an amount of of serious mental challenges coming to the fore. So it is not something that's new, but it is new for us because it has been about 100 years since we've seen anything remotely close to COVID-19 anxiety syndrome. Now, what that is primarily a person's inability to engage in a social setting. It's the inability to even leave the house, to experience symptoms similar to anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, and a myriad of other challenges. Now, these are challenges that come up and are specific to this disorder. Now, that represent, and we could go in depth into that, but I use that as a premise to say that there are a significant amount of challenges that have been affecting persons on a mental level, especially since the onset of COVID. Now, I want you to think of the game hide and seek. And those of you who have children or who engage with children will find that children like to hide, and sometimes it's easy to find them, sometimes it's a little bit difficult. But I want you to think of COVID-19 as the master hide and seek player. COVID is able to find anybody who is hiding. So if you have a mental illness or a mental challenge, not necessarily diagnosable, family challenges, whatever the case may be, COVID is going to find it and will pull out a lot of the issues that have laid dormant for many persons. So there are persons who they would find various places, different activities to do in order to manage the symptoms that come with being locked away, with the changes in lifestyle as related to COVID. But we're finding where a lot of persons are having difficulty just living our everyday, quote unquote, normal life because of the changes that have been made with dealing with COVID. So now everything seems to be under a magnifying glass. So the small family issues that were there, they're suddenly seeming to be on a grander scale. For persons who have mental challenges, it becomes a lot more intense. Family members seem to be under a lot more pressure because they have to be dealing with a lot of the mental, emotional challenges that come that were there from before COVID, but have only seemed to have gotten worse over the past couple of months. Now, as was said before, I work with the Beijing Jamaican embassy based in China. And so a lot of the issues that I see coming up there, yes, persons are having challenges adjusting to the new lifestyle in another country, but you're adding COVID restrictions, you're adding challenges with everyday life. And so you're seeing persons having a lot more emotional challenges than ever before. And so it is a real concern that persons have to face. It is a serious adjustment to life, to a new kind of living. I mean, I know the other presenters will talk about the impact on crime and violence and on education. But I want you to understand that COVID has seeped its way into every crease and crevice of our everyday lives, and chief among which is our mental health, which has, for many persons, have come under a serious attack. And so we're finding where a lot more persons as well are becoming very uncomfortable with even talking about the whole matter of COVID. I want you to think of the last time you stood beside somebody who you know very well, who started to coughed once, sneezed once, looked like they had some kind of flu-like symptoms. And I want you to be honest with me and tell me what ran through your mind when you saw that instance. Or, like we have said, you yourself, you cough once, you sneeze once, and then all of a sudden you want to dose up on medication because you have COVID. And so we don't think about HIV and AIDS as much. We don't think about crime and violence as much. All that is on the minds of many persons is the whole matter of COVID-19. When will I get it? When will I get sick? When will I die? And it can trap us in a cyclical thought of doom and gloom, and there's nothing outside of COVID. Everything else is secondary to that. And if we're not careful, even without getting COVID-19, we can start displaying symptoms of it, and then that worsens our own mental and physical, emotional health. And that leads to other problems. So at the very onset of it, or at the very base, we have to understand, before we have a conversation on anything else, the whole matter of health starts at home, starts with the mind. It starts with what is happening on a cognitive level. You're now, for many persons, or up to recently, they couldn't go anywhere. They were in the same house with the same family members, day in, day out. There was no escape from the reality. There was no freedom, as it were, to express ourselves or to go other places, but yet we felt trapped in a space. And persons who feel a sense of being trapped, they do tend to retaliate against other persons, take it out on themselves, or they simply shut down. And whatever we're talking about, we have to bear in mind that these things all have an impact on our mental, physical, emotional well-being. And it is not something that we can escape so easily. So we have to be very aware of what we're feeling, what is going on with us, how have we been processing a lot of the change that have been happening, and really be honest and open with ourselves. Now, when we think of mental illness, nobody wants to know or to believe that they have a mental challenge, they're emotionally or mentally not functioning at the level that they're supposed to, because mental health continues to be a taboo topic in our country. So even though we're seeing an increase, or sharp increase in pre-existing mental conditions, nobody's really talking about it. And if they're talking about it, they give you the basics. They give you small details. They say, oh, well, this is happening, that is happening, without going in depth. And before you know it, they feel a sense of being overwhelmed. They are feeling as if everything is crumbling around them. And that, of course, impacts on the mental health, or lack thereof. A breakdown in mental health leads to a breakdown in physical health, in social relations, in engaging other people, in how we live our lives in general. And if we're not careful, that kind of breakdown will become irreversible for some persons, depending on how serious the situation has become for them. And so going forward, it is going to be important for us to be a little bit more comfortable in talking about the emotional, the psychological, the other challenges that are coming up in our lives, and how we have been dealing with them, or we have not been dealing with them. So in this game of hide and seek, I encourage us to take our mental health a lot more seriously. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Reverend Marlon, for that opener. There were several things that I took from what you have said, and I wanted to ask one question before I ask the other questions. Do you think good mental health begins at home?
Yes, definitely. Good mental health starts at home. It starts from before we even engage other people. It's what happens on the level of our own minds, how we take care of ourselves. So definitely.
Okay. And I like how you referred to COVID-19 as that great master of hide and seek, because it goes in and it fishes out and it takes out all the little, it goes into every nook and cranny as if it seems, and it preys on all the little, as we would say in Jamaica, the fretration, all those little aspects, and it creates such a great sense of paranoia, because you mentioned, when last have you been beside someone who sneezed or coughed, and what is our initial reaction? And for some of us, we may not shun the person, but then, truth be told, some of us go home wondering if we caught COVID, you know? And then it affects us, and that starts affecting us mentally. That starts affecting us. We wanted to do the test, we overdose with the medication, all of that. We will continue on what you have to say, because you mentioned something, and I wrote down phantom symptoms, but I wanted to bring SSP Lindsay into the conversation for now, for her to put her take on mental health. SSP Lindsay?
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, how are you?
Good
evening.
Oh, good evening. So, and first of all, let me just thank you for inviting myself to be a part of the conversation and to share a little of the Jamaica Constabulary Force's experience policing a pandemic.
Yes.
And in line with our opening speaker, what are some of the things that we are seeing around mental health issues? And of course, as police officers, we don't have the capability and the qualification to diagnose. So we rely pretty much on what we hear, like from clinical psychologists. And we have our medical service branch doctors who constantly help us to understand what's going on with people as we police in a pandemic. So I'll probably look at it briefly from three standpoints: is our day-to-day policing, what we're seeing around the issue of domestic violence, and also what are some of the things that we are seeing with our children, our young people. So for our core policing functions, for over 150 years, we have been policing, and we have been carrying out all aspects of safety and security and thousands of operations. But we have never seen anything quite like what we have seen since March 2020, when we start supporting the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Local Government in policing the pandemic and enforcing Disaster Risk Management Act. That saw us, along with all the other things we do, carrying out the daily curfews, enforcing the lockdown. And of course, lockdown, we think, is a very dreaded word now for people, because as we police, people are just tired of being locked down. And we are seeing how it is having an impact on the mental health of a number of persons in different categories, because we're a free-spirited people. We like to be out. People love nightlife, Jamaica people. And when they can't get to have those outlets, then we see them exhibited in violence. So we saw an increase in violence in a number of areas. There was the belief that because of the lockdown, that we would see a significant reduction in crime and violence. And I can tell you that we looked at our statistics, and we look at statistics globally. It happens nowhere. Almost every single statistics that we have looked at, crime and violence, violent crime increased during COVID-19, especially violence against persons. So we saw some reduction in property crime, and we understand that persons weren't out and about as much, so that we saw less breaking, we saw less burglary, we saw less of that, but we saw more physical and violence among each other. It was very difficult for us as a constabulary, because we were at the forefront of the pandemic supporting. So we were among the vulnerable category of persons. So we also had to struggle with our own mental health issues internally, because it took a toll on our members. And we had members some of what we saw, people would just stay home, very terrified, not wanting to come to work. We had different formations going down totally because somebody contracted the COVID-19 virus or was exposed to COVID-19. So we had to lock down formations. And when we locked down formations, it means that there were persons who had to double up and triple up. So it did take a toll on us. And we had to bring in our support team, our medical services branch with our psychologists. There was a time when we had daily sessions and 3 sessions per day. They were just having ongoing sessions where we had hundreds of police officers just logging on, just asking questions, just wanting to be a part of it. So it was a way that we had to use to calm the members, because we see them big and strong out there and we think they are that macho. But I think COVID-19 has taught us a lot of lessons, that behind that uniform is a human. So we had to deal with our own mental. We had persons who didn't want to leave home. There were some members that we have that had underlying issues. And in the beginning, we weren't sure how the virus worked and what there were no known treatment. So persons were terrified. So there were persons who would call in crying because they were just having a bad breakdown because of the fear that's associated with COVID-19. I think we're handling those aspects of it better now with more information, the advent of vaccine, among other things. We also saw during that time an increase in domestic violence cases. And a lot of the more reports came from women. And we analyzed it. During COVID, we opened 9 domestic violence support centers across the island, because persons were turning up at various police stations, not necessarily reporting a physical crime, but there are a lot of emotional issues that were there. And some of them could not be dealt with at a frontline police station desk. So what we did is that we got together a number of professional volunteers, psychologists, doctors, pastors, persons who were trained to deal with disputes, and they would come in and roster and volunteer to be support persons at these various DV centers. And that worked very well, because nobody gets turned away because you're having a problem. When we assess the situation, the lockdown was a big part of it, because we learned through that not because people live together mean they want to spend all their time together. The men want to stop at the bar and have a drink and come. They don't want to come home to have the constant nag. Now COVID at 6 o'clock and you have to be in at 5. So yes, they love each other, but they don't necessarily want to spend each time all the time together. So you find that they had more conflicts to deal with. And there was no space, because if you leave home now, then chances are you're going to get prosecuted because you're supposed to be at home. And to stay at home, we saw dispute in the family. There were disputes about food. There were disputes about space. So a lot of us never appreciate how some people live. There were some persons in Jamaica, even though they share the same home, they were never there at the same time. They had a shift system. So some go to party late night and sleep in the day, so another person get to. So little things that we take for granted every day. When you see a yard and you see 20 people living there, and you're saying, how these people live in this space? Over time, they found a way to survive and to work with that space by sharing it and not all being together. COVID changed that, so we had fight for space. It was just so many issues that we would not normally have to deal with. So we did get that people wanted to socialize and just couldn't get out. So we did have more calls, even from the mental health people who had persons who had mental health issues. We were getting more calls from the services to support, because of the lockdown and the change in lifestyle, they can't get to move around freely. They don't get to do things, so they become violent and they create noise and they mash up things, and all those things we had to help persons to deal with in the pandemic. Then the last part of it was how we saw that affecting our young people. I think children of school age would look forward to being in school, interacting with their peers, and not doing that, spending so much time on the internet. That was another vulnerability. We also saw, from an abuse point of view, that when the parents can't get to deal with the situation, they turn on the children. So the children were part of the whole system of abuse. They were experiencing their own fair share of mental illness, even at their level, because mommy and daddy not getting along and the children are part of it. It becomes toxic at times, even for the children. We look at our stats from Sisoka, and we saw where at the beginning, we saw a reduction in sexual offenses. We analyzed the data, and what we found could have been a contributor, that And we are comparing that to what we're seeing now, where we are getting more reports of sexual abuse among children because they are staying at home unsupervised and all of that. And we recognize that one of the main source that we got reports from about sexual offenses were mainly from the guidance counselors in school. So with the students not into, because they would open up to the guidance counselors and they would open up to their peers and they would share with the guidance counselors. So they would constantly feed the information into the police and to say, this is what we're seeing. So we never had that because schools are out, but now we're seeing where we're getting reports, and some of the reports that we're getting now are cases that happened last year. So I can say that the Jamaica Constabulary Force was not spared the onslaught of having to deal with mental illness as part of our core function. It affects us, it affects the people we serve, and it continues to be a part of what we do today. Thank you.
Thank you, SSP Lindsay. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that when the pandemic, when COVID really hit our shores and things really started getting serious, you had a lot of online sessions for our police officers. And what I wanted to ask is, did they not get to a point where they were just so saturated with all that was taking place, coming in from all angles? We are talking about going out on the street, going into the hospitals to monitor, and then sitting in front of a computer, going home and having to deal with their own family. So the mental pressure that they were under. I understand that we opened 9 domestic violence centers, and that's great. But was it only the online sessions for our police officers so they can manage?
All right, so we had those online sessions because those online sessions were created as an outlet because there was so much information out there. And a lot of the information out there were not in keeping with what the medical people were saying. Some of them were false. And they were being fed all this false narrative. So even as they go out there, you try to get a policeman to go out on duty. He's very fearful that if he looks at someone with COVID-19, he's going to drop dead, because that's what the narrative that's being fed. So those sessions that we had were just sessions to allow you to come and to say, there's a doctor online, we have a psychiatrist online, and I have a question I want to ask. How do I treat with this? How do I treat with that? So it was a fact thing. And also we had the medical people. So when they feel that way, so it wasn't like, and you didn't have a time that you had to log on. We set up a COVID-19 I-Command Management Center that operated on a 24-hour basis. Because persons may not know, but at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, the Jamaica Constabulary Force was like the hub. We were leading on putting out information. Everybody was relying on our pages went up because we were doing things like different, a lot of things that we started in the JCF, people started doing that long after, because it was important for us, our leaders, Commissioner, I remember very early, he said we had to, when we heard about COVID-19 happening in other places, he started our preparation. So when COVID-19 got to Jamaica in March, we had a lot of things in place. So we had those centers established, we had our members, and it really worked for us. So it wasn't overwhelming for them. It was more a relief. It was more a place to get support. So it was a supporting kind of role. And because we couldn't do a lot of interface and the one-on-one, but even at the station level, they were constant huddling and, because it created distance. So online was the place we had to be, but it worked. It was really, really very good.
Okay, and that's good to know. You also mentioned the situations for which the different situations that the police officers found themselves in terms of looking at the fight for space. When you mentioned the home and certain things that will take place in the home. So it's not strange that some homes run on shifts. And Reverend Marlon, this is where I'd like you to come in and shed some more light. because SSP Lindsay said that, you know, some homes were running on shifts and it was quite seamless and running very well. But with the onset of the pandemic, we found that everybody was under the same space. And so there was this fight for space. But at the same time, you are saying, Reverend Marlon, that good mental health begins at home. How do we come to grapple with good mental health starting at the home, and at the same time, we're fighting for space, we're fighting for our own mental space, and we're fighting for physical space, and we're clashing with the demands of everybody else's mental needs?
All right, that's a really intense question, but overall, one of the things that we found was important was, or what I would encourage persons to do is, even though you may not have the physical space, there must be a space outside somewhere in your immediate surrounding where you can have even 5 minutes for yourself to kind of separate yourself from the immediate presence of everybody else. Even if you're in the same space, the same household as it were, that can cause its own level of anxiety even without interacting with other people. So it is going to be important then to find a separate space outside to literally pull yourself away from other people. That as difficult as it may be, is perhaps one of the most important things to do, because your household won't fall apart for 5 minutes if you separate yourself and try to just deal with everything else that's going on.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that, Reverend Marlon. And at this point, we invite Mr. Jasford Gabriel to jump into the conversation. Good evening, Mr. Gabriel.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm wonderful, absolutely wonderful, Monique. And
excellent.
Great.
Welcome to the conversation. You've been hearing Reverend Marlon and SSP Lindsay.
Sure, very interesting conversation. And first, I want to greet you, the host, all my co-panelists, the program organizers, and the tech team. And say good job to the diocese for continuing this engagement conversation around COVID. Right, and so I'm sure we all know by now, in fact, the World Bank study was very early out to make it clear that the COVID-19 pandemic has caused the greatest dislocation in education in our history. And so this is not a Jamaica problem now, it's a worldwide problem. But certainly in Jamaica here, given the challenges that we would have already had being a third world country, and the fact that, our education system was already skewed a certain way towards maybe the more elite students and parents. And so the majority of our schools, we're talking about 80% of our schools, are non-traditional schools. And that accounts for 80% roughly of our students. And so that's why you have this big thrust coming out of the primary school and competition to get into one of these schools. Now, with the COVID-19 pandemic, what it has done is exacerbated all of this. It has opened up the glaring inequities in our education system. I remember when the COVID-19 came in March of last year, it was a funny thing among many of us as educators, because prior to COVID, many schools, cell phones were not allowed in schools because of the distractions, and all the issues surrounding it and all that kind of thing. Well, after COVID in March, school was now in the phone, and so there was a big rush by schools to just make sure you give out all the phones that were confiscated, because school is now online. And so everybody, parents, students, teachers, all stakeholders were called upon to transition seamlessly, immediately, into a new kind of modality. And so to say it has caused a severe dislocation in our system is an understatement. Monique and the team, one of the things we have to understand more than anything else is that school is not just about pedagogy, that is classroom teaching and learning. School is a great place for social interaction, for spiritual formation, for engagement in co-curricular activities and sports. In fact, even at a traditional school where I work, I always notice when school resumes after a summer break, which is less than 2 months, you may as well don't bother schedule any class for the first session. It's a lot of hugging and socializing and catching up on the summer, people catching up with their friends, a lot of social interactions. And so can you wrap your mind now around just being locked out of school, away from friends, away from teachers, away from persons with whom you have formed close bonds, for over 18 months? It has been extremely devastating. And so when we talk about mental health, it includes all our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It takes in all of that. So it affects how we think, how we feel, how we act. And it helps to determine how we handle stress and other related matters and choices. And so our young people especially would have been at the forefront of this kind of struggle. So since the pandemic, we have been having some psychosocial issues. Obviously, maybe top of it, lack of technology. We have heard the cry right across Jamaica. Either there is no internet. If there is internet, it is very spotty. Or there is just one food in the household and everybody has to get a use of it. We heard of one case while I was president in a rural part where parents just the child had to tie the phone on a bamboo stick and stretch it up to the top of the tree, to receive a message from the teacher or from school, and then pull it down, type the response and put it back up there because that's where the connectivity is. All that kind of desperation to stay connected to the teaching and learning process. And, where we are at as a country in terms of internet sufficiency, connectivity, especially in the rural parts, it still leaves a lot to be desired. Another psychosocial issue, obviously, the lack of teacher and student experience with the technology. In fact, truth be told, many students were far more competent with the technology than teachers, especially at the start of the pandemic. This generation of students, they are very savvy. They learn the different platforms very quickly. And so teachers that were masters of their craft inside the face-to-face instruction suddenly had almost the classroom flipped. And they were struggling now to get onto platforms and to properly engage students, especially where they have so many differentiated abilities. And students had to be given instructions to teachers. And sometimes that might not go down so very well. And so that created part of the issue as well, the psychosocial issue. And of course, we know about the limited digital devices. We launched a one device per child initiative because we were on a drive to see at least by the end of the first year of the pandemic, we could have all our students with a device. We have just about reached about halfway with that. And so impacting mental health is the whole idea of just not being able to socialize with friends, not being able to be in school, which is really a haven, for mental wellness and socialization, spiritual upliftment. And then with all this, still cannot connect, even online, to hear the voices of friends and teachers and so on. Also, we have psychosocial issues continue, lack of financial resources. That has hindered the ability of many schools to quickly springboard into a digital teaching model. And so what you find is that the gap has widened even more between the haves and the have-nots. The traditional schools, when you did a survey, they were accounting for upwards to 90% of their students online. During my presidency, I raised the scenario of the comparison between Holy Trinity and Kingston College, for example. And Kingston College was accounting for 90% of their students. Holy Trinity, which is just a few steps across the road from Kingston College, was about 12%. Just to show you in terms of the mindset, the disparity in terms of resources, and how much more most of our students would have been affected in the pandemic. And so coming out of last school year with over 150,000 by our survey of our students not found since the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, the mental health issues would have multiplied over and over. In my journey going across the country a few times, I saw some of our students working on roads. In St. Thomas, they took jobs on the roadway. They said, boy, you know, not look like school when I start again, you know, I earn a little thing. And when they get hooked onto that, even when students were called back for a few days, they didn't want to give up the jobs and so on. And so they had it's a different kind of orientation. So the teachers encountered those kind of struggles trying to locate their students. The students themselves having to try to figure out, you know, should I continue with school? Is this ever going to work out again? Am I ever going to see my friends again? And all impacting on mental health. I mentioned drastic reduction in social interaction and co-curricular activities and sports. Can I tell your colleagues, students, especially boys, they are crazy about sports and co-curricular activities. Schools are very big on clubs and societies and sports. At Manchester High School, for example, we have 32 clubs and societies. We participate in about 7 sporting disciplines. And we always say we are in it to win it. Students hide from classes many times because they want to go to training, they want to watch a game, they want to play basketball on the court, or they just want to be in the auto mechanic shop, you know, in terms of hands-on experiences and so on. All of that would have been, it's like a rug that has been pulled from under your feet, and you now have to readjust at a stage in your life when you are more socially interactive than ever. And of course, I couldn't speak without mentioning from a teachers association perspective, a lack of sensitivity to the mental health concerns of our educators. And that has affected our children as well. And so though we made the point that the American Psychological Association says 4 hours of screen time maximum for teachers, we have no such guidelines. So teachers spending upwards of 10, 12 into the night. And what we have is a lot of teachers going on with eye problems, neck problems, back problems. We saw a lot of letters coming in for help, for glasses, because we in the interest of trying to make sure that we catch up with all that has been lost, we have been burning the midnight oil online. We have the students on long hours than they are supposed to be as well. They like breaks, they like to go out and play. You heard the other day, China, you know, they wanted a ban on homework and they wanted to make playtime more compulsory, because all of that is so essential in terms of mental health. And so the levels of engagement in distance learning during the teaching remote era by age group, the lowest engagement was 75% among the primary school students based on our survey. Even when students got on, in the majority of cases, they would have been the more senior students. And up to, in many cases, up to 90% of the primary and prep school students could not be engaged during the pandemic. Either lacking device, the financial resources to purchase the data, kind of thing, and so on. In general, over half the adults who responded on behalf of households were satisfied with, in a survey that I looked on, with the distance learning option, especially, like I say, among the older students. Very quickly before I put a wrap, what were some of the effects that we saw clearly coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic on education, both for students and teachers? The effects: feeling restless, wound up, or on edge. It's like a tiger that is caged. You just want to get out. You want to do something. Secondly, having difficulty concentrating. Mind going blank. Our teachers many times complain about that. Being irritable. Both students and teachers getting irritable. Outside of their normal, usual character. Much of that is because of the frustration of trying to cope with teaching and learning online. One of my colleagues, you know, in a program we were on together, said the online teaching is attractive, but it's not effective. Not effective because it cannot properly address the social issues, you know, and the psychosocial matters of which we raised earlier. Some of the other issues, muscular tension, sleeping problems, restlessness, having a sense of impending danger, panic or doom. Some young people, they don't feel that they will have a chance to enjoy life again, to get married and to rear a family. They just figure that maybe it seems as if one, the world is coming to an end, or secondly, it doesn't seem like COVID is gonna stop anyway. And so all of these things impact on mental wellness, and the ability to concentrate and to focus. And of course, feeling weak and tired. We found that among quite a few of our students as well. And so, the challenge we have now, we thought, and based on our projections, if we were able to open school in September safely by rotating year groups, even if we couldn't bring in everybody, we would have been well on our way to recover much of the learning loss. So we projected within a year, we could make up to 80% enrolled, because a plan was laid out already, working in collaboration with parents, the ministry, the Teachers Association, and students. And so the fact that we still have not been able to open, it means now that we are in a crisis, serious crisis in education. I was just listening this evening, doctors are predicting a fourth wave of the pandemic by around January, February, because all the different factors are coming together now to facilitate that. The vaccine hesitancy, the reopening of schools again, the no movement days, that we have. All of these are necessary, we may think, but there's a cost to be paid, and the truth is, education is at the heart of what we must do and make a priority as a nation. And every time we lose a day, the problems are multiplied. We are creating more unattached youth. We are creating more of our young people that will leave school without the requisite qualification. We saw in the external examination a predictable drop in the standard of performance, even though the exams had to be watered down to, in a sense, to facilitate the students who are doing it. The PEP exam was reduced from what used to be 4 papers just to 1. And so our assessment is not the same. The results are not of the same standards. A lot of students, still over 100,000 disconnected. And so the mental health challenges to go with that are significant. And so what we have to do in terms of, as a nation, partnership is important with the different stakeholders, and we continue to put strategies in place, as teachers and students, taking into consideration the different learning styles and learning levels, how we bring students back, even the short term, has to be well thought out, those doing exams, and then others, first and second formers, they would have not even seen some of them, the new school from last year. We have to find a way to get them in, because parents are experiencing challenges with them at home. They have been victims of multiple, you heard SSP speaking about some of the challenges that we have been having. They have become victims of some of the crime and violence across the society. And so difficult times, but we have to wrap our minds around it, partner together as educators and citizens, and seek to secure a brighter day for our education system. I rest it there for now.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Gabriel. And yes, you are resting for now indeed, because we are going to bring you back into the conversation. And so what we're going to do now is engage in more of a discussion now. So the 3 panelists are free to pitch in their take on whatever question will be fielded by our viewers, both on Facebook and in the Zoom room. So this is now an indication for our members in the Zoom room to put your questions in the chat. If you have any burning questions for the panelists, and we hope that you do. In the meantime, there are some questions that I would like to ask, but Mr. Gabriel, you had mentioned that our teachers, both our teachers and our students, have been severely affected by the pandemic. A lot of variables changed for us, and one of the variables that you made mention of is the fact that, and this is what I find so interesting, cell phones, which were banned in schools, have now become the chief textbook, the chief book the source of almost everything for some persons. In addition to that, initially, the experts who were the students who were the learners, it shifted, the dimension shifted, because students now became the experts helping teachers like myself to navigate certain spaces so the lessons could go on.
Right.
But we're now at a point where for our mental health, it almost, for me, and I mean, I stand open for correction, but when the whole topic of mental health came to the fore, at the time of the pandemic, we were looking at all the mothers and the fathers, we were looking at the aunties, the uncles. It's almost as if our eyes are now being opened to our students. We looked at the fact that our students were not able to interact, and truth be told, some of our parents, some of us parents are saying, the children are at home, they're happy with their gadgets. But then certain things started manifesting. Certain things started manifesting. And it's almost as if we realize that mental health is something for our children as well. Do you know of any initiative now that the guidance departments or so will take on or can take on board to help our students? I don't know exactly how to phrase the question, but I know exactly what I'm asking in terms of reaching our students now online, in the online space. How do they reach our students who not only have the welfare problems but have the mental problems?
Excellent. And so it's a big deal. And we were early on, for example, insisting that schools need to develop a trauma-centered kind of approach to education. And so we have psychosocial sessions now that have been built in as part of the regular timetable for schools, whether online or face-to-face. And we have made the point that whenever we do go to face-to-face instruction, it's pointless to rush into the actual teaching and learning of content to fulfill a curriculum. We have to be very mindful of all what our students especially would have been going through over the past several months, and have a trauma-centered kind of approach to facilitate, clarity of mind and thought, building again that kind of trust and bonding again with friends and their peers. We need time for that, because in terms of adjusting to the curriculum, we will encounter more frustrations there if we don't use that kind of trauma-centered approach. Ensure that, I know schools, for example, that every morning there's a session that deals with the psychosocial issues. And so whether it comes from a spiritual standpoint, or some guidance counselor share, or a parent share, or another student share from his or her own experience, coping strategies and skills, so that others can get a sense that they are not alone in the struggle, they are not alone in the fight. They hear others sharing some of the same challenges and concerns. So that has to be a big part of any curriculum in the short term now. And I'm glad that the Ministry of Education and Information has bought into that, and has fully supported schools, ensuring that psychosocial sessions are a fixed part of the scheduling going forward.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Gabriel. There is a question that I'm putting out for all our panelists, and I would like, this is one for all our panelists to answer, and it would be interesting to hear. What role do you think the church can play in the wider community in assisting the JCF with the fight against domestic violence and peace in schools? What role do you think the church can play? And this is for all our panelists.
I guess the Reverend will have first.
Reverend, you're going first on that one?
No worries. Of course, SSP Lindsay, go right ahead.
Well, I'm not going to pick on the Reverend, but I believe that the church continues to be one of the most respected institutions at the community level, and they can influence and impact. And when it comes to domestic violence matters, the church can play many roles, because sometimes the church gets blamed for the continuation of some aspect of domestic violence because of the doctrine that they support, in that together forever until death do us part, and people take that literally. So sometimes, if it is not communicated properly and people don't understand that in that quote there is no role for abuse, and that is true when things are working the way they ought to. But I know that a number of the ministers of religion, and as I say that, I have to be mindful of what I say minister, but I'm talking about genuine ministers of religion. They are also trained in the aspect of counseling, and some of them in psychology. So they already have the trust of their congregation that they can reach out to and to have these conversations. Because we find that a lot of the times when the matters come to the police, that is when it gets violent. And chances are, if we had this army of support that people could really talk to and trust and feel confident that it could help them to resolve the conflict, somebody would not be judgmental and imposing, because sometimes people don't want to share with the pastor or people in the church because they tend to be judgmental, and people might feel you're going to impose your sanctimonious and righteousness on me, and I don't really want that. I have a problem that I want you to see, not just from a biblical standpoint, but from a practical standpoint. So from the Jamaica Constabulary Force, we welcome that kind of support where we can sit and have the reason and have the conversation. They also have accommodation in terms of venue and space that they can share, that we could probably establish more DV centers or points of contact where the police and the people and the problem can come together and we find a resolution. So that's one area that I think the church can, and I'm sure there are others from the other panelists.
Thanks, SSP, and we take the other panelists' perspective.
Right, and so just as SSP was saying, I think both from a biblical and practical perspective, Rev will speak better to this than me, but certainly the gospel itself is a gospel of transformation. I see in church where I worship at Manual New Testament persons who were definitely menaces to society, and we see it right across the country. Somebody maybe invited them, somehow they got connected to the church, they were evangelized, witness, and now they are singing and choirs, doing all kind of things, and productive citizens. And so we cannot downplay the efficacy and the power of the gospel. Also, many of the problems that we encounter, it's because of the fight for scarce resources and the harsh economic realities that are out there. And so I know, again, at the church I worship, we have what we call a benevolence ministry. Under that ministry, we have counseling services. And so we have trained counselors, you have teachers who volunteer, you have pastors that help to persons who are experiencing challenges, whether they are young people, adolescents, adults, whether it is family type, home, wherever, you know, they get counseling services. There's feeding for street people, you know, there's care packages similar to what maybe the government does within the community. Persons know where they can come to church and get some, you know, something to eat, something to wear. We assist with assisting students going back to school, those who can come by for some internet services and so on. So as the church, you know, expands its role in terms of outreach and allowing persons to feel more productive and be more responsible, I think that will redound to the reduction in crime and violence across the society.
Thank you for that. Yes, Reverend Marlon.
Well, I agree with everything that has been said a while ago, but as one who is in the church, but I've also worked with the police force for many years. And one of the things that I found to be most effective is something we call psychoeducation. It's educating the people on the different areas. And of course, gender-based violence is an important topic that I think has gone unspoken about for too long. And it is something that we need to talk about in church and in other organizations and settings as well. Now, having said that, I think that a lot of times we get confused with what pastors are able to do and what counselors and psychologists are supposed to do. Because as much as pastors are trained to a point to deal with some of the issues that come up, some of it goes above the level of training that they receive. And so somebody like me who, well, I said, let me go and continue studying to the point where I'm able to deal with a variety of issues, both mental and otherwise. That is the area that we need to focus on. The fact that we need to refer persons to the relevant authorities or to persons who are so trained to deal with it. Because if we don't, we can cause more harm than good. And oftentimes, by the time persons come to my office, I have to undo a lot of what was done before.
Right.
And in undoing all of that is saying, well, you're going to have to unlearn a lot of what you were taught, especially about gender-based violence, especially about how we treat one another, how we deal with one another in a confined space. So again, education, educating the people in different areas or ways is going to be critical. Yeah. Also, just being honest with ourselves and the other people around us that I am not okay, I'm not doing well. Find somebody who we can talk to and say, hey, this is an issue. Where can I get some help to deal with this? And I think that in and of itself is a good way for persons to deal with all of the realities that are coming up.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that, panelists. Another question that that has been posed in one of our chats as we talk about the church and its role or the intended role of the church. We look at what we seem to be operating in in silos and sectors. You know, what meaningful collaborations can you possibly suggest as we move forward? Because Mr. Gabriel is mentioning the possibility of a fourth wave coming in. And if we're going to be experiencing a fourth wave, then we have to have certain collaborations ready to deal with the prolonged effects of the pandemic. What possible collaborations can you possibly suggest?
Well, if I might, certainly one of the things that the pandemic has taught us is that we have to build stronger partnerships and have greater collaboration. And certainly what I've seen some of the churches start and what I expect that they will expand is just joining to opening up their facilities to help to facilitate. I'm speaking now mainly from an educational perspective. The church helped to bail out, if you want to put it that way, many of our students and teachers during the pandemic. They were able to cater to students within particular communities by giving them access to their premises, utilizing their facilities, utilizing their internet services, giving a meal sometimes, and so on. So I think we have to break the denominational borders if we're going to confront this pandemic meaningfully, and it has to begin from the level of the church. If I begin to preach, it's Christ that said he has broken down the middle walls of partition that were between us and has made us one. And so pandemic knows no color, no creed, no denomination. And so I'm happy to see that we are stretching hands across the different denominational boundaries to see how is it that we can come together, to help to meet the needs, to buy devices, to provide internet, to provide a space, to provide counseling services, and the list goes on. So I think the church can lead the way as far as this is concerned.
If I may?
Sorry, right. SSP Lindsay, I was going to ask you to come in. Okay, go ahead.
All right. So one of and it's a pet peeve of mine, because one of the ways I believe that the church can play a strong role because of their influence and because of their access to people, the take-up for the vaccination is way too low. It is way too low. And even as Mr. Gabriel, the prediction that we could probably see a fourth wave because we are restricting, we are reducing some of the restrictive measures so as to help with the mental health of some persons. But at the same time, even as we do that now, there is not a better take-up of the vaccine. So the preventative mechanism that we know about, people are not gravitating towards it. So I believe that from where the church sits, the church probably could partner with the Ministry of Health and other agencies, and to have more push and more drive, even to have pop-up vaccination centers on a church day when people can come out and so on, because sometimes people are not taking the vaccine because they still don't want to go out into the public space to do it. But I believe that we have to find a way how we take it to them. We have to try to be part of that group of messengers that's really helping people to understand the efficacy of the vaccine, to understand why it is important to take that vaccine, because how a society that has some level of protection will come together quickly and bounce back. We can't continue to talk about what other countries are doing, and those people are taking the vaccine and we're not taking the vaccine, and we expect to have that same type of freedom and privilege. I mean, COVID-19 and lockdown is taking a mental health and just about everybody. To me too, I want to see us being able to go back out and socialize and interact in a way that people should. So I want to see the churches rallying around the message about the vaccine.
It's really too much, you know, SSP Lindsay, it really is too much. And I am glad that you would have answered, because I have a follow-up question for you. What role do you think the police youth clubs can possibly play in all of this? Not just but to also, yeah. What role do you think they can play? We're talking about the whole the whole picture here, helping young people to manage themselves, manage their mental space and capacities. What role do you think they can play?
Okay, thanks. I think the police youth club can play a significant role because peer support is very important. And sometimes if I talk to a young person, you might say, you're all right, you're afraid to die from COVID. But if we have young people as ambassadors, and I know that our police youth clubs, a lot of them are some very brilliant and very articulate young people. And if we can get them to fall in line and to start being voices, because when we started out with the education around COVID, it was sold that young people not among the vulnerable group. So the young people don't see the need to take the vaccine per se. And it is still the fact, as we understand it, that they are not among the vulnerable group. But when they are unvaccinated, then they create a vulnerability for the people who are more likely to contract the virus. So I believe that the young people can play a role in terms of peer mentoring, peer support. They could create sessions, even online sessions, because online is where it's at. And they easily gravitate to the online platform because they were there long before COVID took us there. So there is a role that they can play. And we have the method of reaching multiple persons. It's just for us to sit and to see how do we position them? What is the narrative we want them to be carrying? What kind of message we think is more suited, because not every message is for everybody. So collectively from the school, what would the school want the young people to be saying? What the psychologists want people to say, what the police want to be said, and how do we get that into a one message that the young people can really relate to in a very strong way, that we're reaching a lot of people with a simple message.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And this is just a reminder to our participants in joining us here on Zoom that you actually have the option to raise your hand and we will identify you as you pose a question. And so I'm going to put forward the next question to our panelists as we further the discussion and we wait on our Zoom participants to become a little unshy, right? Mr. Gabriel, you have spoken about the support, the collaboration with the church, but I wanted to ask, one of the questions put forward in the chat just now is what provisions have been put in place for teachers and students who were experiencing extreme mental health issues prior to COVID-19. And now that COVID-19 has actually exacerbated the situation, what provisions are put in place?
So
I don't know if you can shed light on that for us, but yes, great.
I'll have to talk from a perspective of a union representative because it has been one of our major concerns even prior to the pandemic. I think we have underestimated the real impact of the mental health challenges on both students and teachers, to the extent that what the Ministry of Education and Information has many times is like one social worker that serves an entire parish. If you take Manchester, for example, or it might even be a region, so it's several schools, that is impractical. And so even to get an appointment to have a sit down, counselors are overworked in school. You have counselors in high school, it's one counselor to like 500 students. And in primary schools, they share counselors many times. Some don't have any. And so it was inadequate. So you can imagine now, since the pandemic, the real strain on the system and the effects both on teachers and students. So I share the concerns, and this is something that we have taken to the ministry level. I know that the ministry would have added more resources in terms of human resource to the pool of persons that are providing support to schools and to teachers, but it's really far from being adequate. And that's why it's so important that the churches, different community groups, as SSP was speaking about the police youth clubs, I've always been impressed, for example, the police youth club and how they engage students through young people through sports. I don't think we understand fully the impact of persons just not being able to get out there and play. The benefits of play and sports, are untold when it comes to addressing mental health issues. And so we have to sometimes look beyond what the government is able to do for us and collaborate and partner to see how is it that we can also help ourselves. Because you're talking about 24,000 teachers going up to 25,000 now. You're talking about upwards of 700,000 students. And so there will never be enough so that you can have even 1-to-5 ratio for one-on-one sit-down and professional services. So we have to pull on the different groups, expertise, professionals across the systems, and so that we can have conversations about this, share experiences, and encourage others in a meaningful way as we seek to treat with the pandemic.
Right. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Gabriel. And as you speak of how it is that we, the teachers are getting support, and you think of the teachers in the homes, I wanted to ask Reverend Marlon, you've been silent for a little while, Reverend Marlon. A question was posed to ask. You said, well, space, we know that space is needed for mental health growth, we need that quiet time. But what do we do when there is no space? We're talking about the physical space, as SSP Lindsay had mentioned. What do we do in that case when there is just no space?
Break curfew hours.
All right.
Did somebody say?
All right.
Oh, okay.
I tell you, in terms of finding that space, I always revert to a statement that I use in all of my presentations. We remain physically distant but emotionally connected. And I think that if we are able to, all right. So as SSP Lindsay had said, that 20 persons living in a household, they find a way to work it out. There is a way for them to orchestrate the space in such a way that they can find their own little niche or comfort zone where they can build on their own emotional capacities. How do you do that? You can be in a space and still be lonely. The opposite is true. You can be in a crowded space and always being engaged by others, but still find that mental space to literally separate yourself from other people. It sounds impossible, it sounds difficult to do, but it is actually quite easy for persons to literally mentally pull themselves away from what's happening around them. Many of us growing up, we had to study while we had other persons in the household making noise or causing problems, but we found a way to make it work. And we find where persons can do the same thing. They can, in the space, create a mental breakaway or mental space where they can just literally block everybody else out. Now, I mean, the other thing too is to stay away from a lot of the statements that are going around now. In the medical field, there's a running term that we refer to called Dr. Google. Everybody consults Dr. Google.
Oh yes.
And so I've had patients who have come to me and they say, you know, I've been experiencing this, I've been experiencing that, but Google tells me that I have cancer, that I might be dying in the next 2 weeks. And it's a very damaging way to get information. So it's narrowing the amount of information that you absorb, the amount of information that you take in, because it can begin to affect how you function on a daily basis. So even in family settings, just try to separate yourselves from what's going on in the news. Too much of the anti-vaccine regime, of the misinformation, of everything that is going on around you, and listen to simple facts every now and again from reliable sources, from the CDC, from news networks like like BBC, CNN, and get the right facts. But then we have to be careful of how we take in too much information nonetheless.
I'm glad you mentioned that. SSP Lindsay, you wanted to say something? Oh, okay, all right. But I'm glad you mentioned that, Reverend Marlon, because as we go into wrapping up our conversation, there's a final question that I'm going to ask that we put our thoughts into and just wrap it as a part of our final comment. And it is, what practical steps can be taken when we feel the anxiety of the COVID-19 issues and the COVID-19 news coming on? What practical steps can we take from all perspectives, from you three panelists? What practical steps do you think that we can take as you wrap up your take on the conversation?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to be a little bit more understanding with yourself, to be a little bit more practical with yourself. So you started coughing, you hear other people coughing around you. Is it COVID? Maybe, maybe not. And that's the truth. But at the same time, we have to stop making everything be about COVID, because there are a number of other mental, emotional, physical challenges that are around us that we need to pay attention to. And if we zone in on one, we neglect the others and they can get worse. So in summary, then, what I'm saying is we have to live as a balanced life as we can, given the COVID-19 reality that we're in. Mm-hmm. Yes, it is a challenge. Yes, these are problems, but we have to live a holistic life that seeks to satisfy every aspect of our lives, the social, the emotional, the physical well-being. And as we improve on those different areas, then it leads to a sense of calmness, a sense of, okay, it is not as overwhelming or catastrophic as we thought it was. And I leave you with this thought. There was somebody who I engaged who said, you know, I'm so afraid of getting COVID. Unfortunately, she contracted it. And I said to her, well, when did you die? How was the funeral? And she said, what do you mean? I didn't die. And I said, because oftentimes we make things look so bad, so uncomfortable, so difficult, that it leads us to think and to do all kinds of things. And so we have to be reining in the thoughts and really taking stock of what is true, what is not true, and making the right decision.
Right. Thank you so much, Reverend Marlon. SSP Lindsay?
Okay, so in closing, I just so you want practical steps. So of course,
just a few, but Couple seconds.
Right, so the Jamaica Constabulary Force, we continue to be at the forefront of the pandemic, supporting the lead agencies. For us is that we think that COVID will always be with us, because a lot of the things that COVID impacts now are things that will impact the JCF down the road. What's happening with our youth population, what's happening in the family, the violence, you name it. So we will continue the journey. What I want to see is more collaboration. COVID has taught us more than anything else that individually we can't achieve much, but collectively we can achieve so much more. So from the Jamaica Constabulary Forces standpoint, we'd like to see all the partners and all the critical stakeholders coming together. There's a big concern about our youth population right now, those that Mr. Gabriel speaks about, and what will happen to them down the road, having this gap in the education area. It was a challenge before. After COVID, we expect it to be more going forward. In the past, we saw those set of persons end up with us on the other side. So it's something that we have to start forecasting and planning for, even as we plan to treat with the immediate situation. So practically, I think we just have to continue to plan. We have to continue to anticipate. And of course, we all must participate.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, SSP Lindsay. And to round up our panelists' view, Mr. Gabriel.
Yeah, thank you. Tremendous conversation. Thank you so much. It has been enlightening. And we can agree that certainly communication, I think. Communication and collaboration, critical, practical things that we must do. It is not all negative. We have some positives coming out of the pandemic. I didn't know that we were able to gather so many people so quickly until we went online. We can quickly get 2,000 students and parents in one space, depending on which kind of package we have. And you can get power talk with one person joining from Spain and one from Australia and a couple from Jamaica kind of thing. And so it's very important. Rev spoke about how we sift out information that is damaging. We have to network in such a way, seek to do that so that we build collaborative partnerships and relationships that are uplifting, persons who we can call upon in times of struggles and challenges, and be sure that you can get a solid word, because everybody's going through something else. And so on our own, we simply cannot go through this. So the networking, the communication, the collaboration, I find those have to be watchwords as we seek to treat with the rigors and brought on by this pandemic. Obviously, it calls for courage, lots of it. We have two options: either we give up or we just press on. You know, and I suggest we just need to press on, but we have to do that holding hands together. Together we are stronger. I'm very concerned, obviously you heard when I speak about our education system. It is in dire straits, I can tell you that. It's going to be a long time before we are able to have any serious indentation into what has happened, especially due to the mental health issues and the repercussions of that, and inadequate resources to treat with that. And even when we recover, we would have lost maybe, I don't want to say a whole generation, but it's so urgent that we have more conversations like these, you know, that we put the tips out there, that we build the partnerships so that together we can go stronger. Whether we are speaking from a social standpoint or a spiritual standpoint or from an educational standpoint, we must collaborate. We must come together. You know, we must rally around the things that are noble and that are beneficial to building our nation and to building our lives as individuals. Nelson Mandela says education is the most powerful weapon that we can use to change the world. You know, and so if we take that seriously, it means that there's really a need for serious intervention in our education system. One of the things we didn't touch on this, but so many of our teachers, even trying to cope with the stresses of this system, treating with the behavioral challenges online. A student that just turn off camera, log in, turn off camera and gone. And the teacher is there teaching. Some of them only to realize after teaching for an hour, nobody's online. Some other teachers we have had a rapid migration of teachers. The numbers are staggering. And they feel that maybe other jurisdictions are more considerate in terms of their mental health, well-being, emotional and financial status and so on. So on one hand, we have the mental health challenges. On the other hand, we are losing many of our best teachers, you know, and so it's a terrible kind of a conundrum. But there is hope, and based on what we have heard tonight, you know, we have so many resourceful individuals, persons, entities, organizations that we just need to keep doing that which is right, keep perpetuating the positive message. SSP spoke about endorsing the efficacy of vaccines. You get pushed by people from church people sometimes, but we have to be consistent with the message, you know, and try to see how best together we can rescue our society. But thank you so much. I think it has been a powerful time.
Thank you so much for your contribution as well, Mr. Gabriel. And we say thank you to all our panelists for taking the time to come and share in this, you know, this thought-provoking conversation, mental health and you. We invite you to join our Bible study sessions, which will follow for the following Wednesdays in the month. And we ask that you like and subscribe to the conversations around the diocese. Invite a friend for our next conversation, as well as our Bible studies that we have. We would like to say thanks to our team for putting together this month's conversation. We say thanks to Mrs. Clavia Watson-Reed, who stepped in as our Zoom meeting host, and to our executive producer, Reverend Father Kirk Brown. I was your host, Monique Castle, and for the conversation this evening, we leave you with a thought and with a charge to remember space, mental health, it's a part of your whole being. And so we say adieu for this month's conversation. Take care.